At 0642 local time, the ocean north of Puerto La Cruz decided to remind everyone who really owns it. The Venezuelan patrol vessel Giciary, a 2,300-ton gray blur built for coastal defense, was running her usual dawn patrol 14 knots radar humming sonar whispering through a calm Caribbean morning. The bridge smelled of diesel and stale coffee, the kind of quiet rhythm sailors rely on to keep the sea predictable. It didn't last long. Sonar logged a distortion, first small, then violent. A blue screen flickered into crimson. The operator froze. Displacement spike bearing 086 rapid ascent. In layman's terms, something big was coming up fast. 2 miles off the bow, the surface of the sea bulged like it had swallowed a mountain. A second later, steel punched through saltwater, throwing a geyser 30 feet into the air. No distress beacon, no radio hail, just black hull, cold, clean, and deliberate. The Giciary sensors went wild, depth profiles flashing in alarm, red. Every sailor in that CIC knew the silhouette instantly. A vertical sail, tapered hull, matte black finish, absorbing morning light like a shadow-given mass. No markings, no flag. But recognition doesn't require translation. Virginia-class, U.S. Navy. Nuclear-powered, fast, and up until 5 seconds ago, utterly invisible. On the bridge, Captain Rojas didn't shout. He didn't need to. Track and log. That was enough. General quarters followed by instinct. Doors sealed, crew at posts. The ship's twin diesels spun up from steady to strained. The Giciary turned starboard, maintaining intercept angle, while keeping a cautious 1.9 nautical mile buffer. At that range, even a pelican would have tripped the radar alarm, but this wasn't wildlife. This was hardware. From the sea, the American submarine looked almost artistic, water cascading down its sail in slow rivulets, the hull gleaming under half-formed sunlight. Nothing about its motion was random. No listing, no drift. Each bubble trail was geometry. Whoever commanded that boat wasn't surfacing by accident. Inside the Venezuelan Combat Information Center, the data poured in. Bearing 086 steady. CPA closest point of approach closing slowly. Radar range 1.9 nautical miles. Sonar strength off the chart. The tech adjusted gain just to keep the display from blinding him. For 3 minutes, even the ocean seemed to hold its breath. No radio call came from the sub. None expected. MCON emissions control meant the Americans were playing by their own script. Presence, ops, appear, linger, vanish. It's how you remind a coastline that laws of navigation are one thing and capability is another. The Venezuelan patrol vessel wasn't some rusting relic. Italian-built sensors, Soviet-inspired doctrine, a hybrid of two worlds that often disagreed on what defensive posture meant. The Giciary patrolled a sector the Navy called the Bolivarian Security Zone. Officially, her task was to ensure maritime sovereignty. In reality, she was a small ship staring daily into the edge of a superpower's playground. At 0644, the captain ordered optical confirmation. Through binoculars, the black shape dominated the horizon. The sun caught on rivets that shouldn't have been visible. No periscopes up, no deck crew topside, just the sail and partial hull above water still venting air pockets. The sub looked like it owned the silence around it. Back on the Venezuelan bridge, the crew worked in disciplined quiet. Cameras trained, timestamps logged every data line backed up to an external drive. They knew the rule in gray zone waters: you don't shoot, you record. Information is the first weapon. At 0645 engine room, reported full propulsion readiness. The ship held steady at 14 knots, keeping the coastline 19 nautical miles astern, close enough to run, far enough to claim neutrality. The captain's voice stayed level, though his eyes didn't leave the sail on the horizon. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew that Submarine had already mapped their acoustic signature long before breaching the surface. It wasn't announcing presence, it was confirming dominance. By 0647, the radar stabilized. The sub remained motionless, perfectly aligned at bearing 086, as if daring them to move first. On the Giciary's sonar display, the trace flattened into calm blue again. The sea had gone back to pretending nothing happened. The captain exhaled slowly. "Keep recording. No transmissions." The words were almost ceremonial. The ocean outside glimmered quiet, deceptively peaceful. But everyone on that bridge understood the implication when a U.S. submarine chooses to show itself. It's not discovery, it's demonstration. The Venezuelan ship continued her slow arc north wake, cutting through the still water. Somewhere below the American reactor hummed softly the soundless proof of power that didn't need to explain itself. The Caribbean had resumed its morning calm, but calm in naval language is just data waiting for change. At 0647 local time, the world shrank to 2 ships and a few miles of charged seawater. The Venezuelan patrol vessel Giciary held course at 14 knots. The American submarine, half submerged and silent, remained dead in the water, a black monolith surrounded by rings of foam. The morning sun had climbed high enough to reflect off its sail, turning the matte hull into a glimmering blade. No movement, no hails, not even a flicker of navigation lights. Just a nuclear-powered question mark parked off Venezuela's northern fence line. Inside the Giciary's Combat Information Center, the air felt dense. Screens hummed, relays clicked, and every man was waiting for the first break in pattern. A turn, a ping, anything. The sonar operator's voice cut through the static. Contact steady. Depth 0. No propeller noise. Translation: the sub wasn't repositioning. It was holding depth intentionally. Captain Rojas gave his next order calmly. Maintain 15 knots. Record bearing drift. It was less about movement and more about posture, showing presence without provocation. The ship's gyro compass showed a subtle drift from 086 to 084 degrees. The American sub was turning barely perceptibly, a degree or two at a time, enough to align its sail directly toward the Venezuelan bow. In the language of naval encounters, that was body language measured, deliberate and unmistakable. The Venezuelan captain didn't need his interpreter to explain it. When a warship points its bow at you, it's not sightseeing. It's declaring intent. By 0649, the CPA had dropped to 6 nautical miles. The radar cross-section confirmed no other U.S. surface vessels nearby, which somehow made it worse. One sub alone, visible by choice like a sniper walking into the open. The Americans called these maneuvers presence operations. The Venezuelans had another term, testing the leash. Up on deck, a few sailors had gathered along the starboard rail, binoculars glued to faces. Regulations discouraged gawking, but even seasoned crews weren't used to seeing a U.S. submarine this close, this exposed. Through the morning haze, the vessel's outline was surreal, smooth, seamless, not a single weld visible. Its hull absorbed sunlight like it hated attention. Down in the sonar room, gain controls flickered. Then it happened, a single ping. Clean. Focused. Loud enough to rattle the bulkheads. Active sonar from the American side. Not aggression, just punctuation. Like clearing one's throat before a statement. The room went still. The sonar technician looked up. "Sir, they've pinged us." Rojas didn't blink. "Copy. Maintain course. Keep recording." It wasn't an attack, but it was a statement of dominance. "We see you. We're not guessing anymore." The Americans were taking measurements, hull density, echo pattern, return decay data, worth more than gold in maritime intelligence. At 0650, the Venezuelan captain ordered a lateral adjustment. "Bring us to parallel bearing. Maintain offset 2 nautical miles." The helm answered, and the Giciary shifted to a track just off the submarine's beam, a textbook move. Not threatening, but firm enough to signal defiance. From the bridge, the black shape of the submarine filled the center of the horizon. It hadn't moved an inch. The water around it looked unnaturally calm, as if the ocean itself was holding its breath. Every radar sweep, every electromagnetic return was being logged on both sides. The Americans were recording Venezuelan search frequencies, radar power outputs, even radio static patterns. The Venezuelans were cataloging hull angles, surface reflections, and wake dispersion. In modern naval warfare, the battle doesn't begin with missiles, it begins with metadata. By 0652, the CPA had fallen again 1.3 nautical miles. The Giciary held steady. On deck, the 50 caliber gun crews took their stations, barrels elevated but cold. Their job wasn't to fire. It was to be seen firing if needed. Visibility is the new diplomacy. Inside the Venezuelan CIC comms chatter was down to whispers. The sub's sonar pulse echoed once more, weaker this time, fading into the static of the sea, then silence. The radar trace stayed solid. No dive, yet no propulsion signature. It was waiting. The captain finally spoke, half to himself, half to the log. "They're testing us, seeing how close we'll hold." His XO nodded but said nothing. There wasn't much to say. The two vessels were now locked in maritime chess, separated by 1.5 miles of open water and a century of power disparity. One wrong bearing change, one overzealous radar lock, and the sea would light up with consequences neither side could afford. At 0655, the Venezuelan deck camera zoomed in tight on the sub's hull. The surface markings shimmered faintly, pressure hull vents bleeding residual air. Not panic, just procedure. Every move deliberate. By 0657, nothing had changed, which, in this business, was the escalation. Silence is louder than sound when the stakes are nuclear-powered. The bridge log recorded the final note of the sequence: CPA 1.2 nanometers, U.S. submarine stationary, visual confirmation steady, no hostile action observed, tension high. In other words, no shots, no retreat, and no blinking. At 0657 hours, the standoff had matured into something that could only exist between professionals, two crews, two nations, both aware that every knot, every bearing, every breath was being recorded somewhere deep inside a command bunker. The Giciary held steady at 15 knots, course 084. The submarine hadn't moved in 15 minutes. It just sat there, half-submerged command sail, facing the Venezuelan vessel like a drawn blade held in absolute stillness. At 0658, a ripple broke the calm, a subtle roll to port. Barely 10 degrees, but enough to change the tone in the room. The sonar operator called it immediately. Contact bearing changing. 086 to 083. They're aligning on us. It wasn't radar lock. It was geometry, the kind that precedes either a handshake or a warning. Captain Rojas didn't hesitate. Parallel course port 5 degrees. Maintain 2-mile offset. His helmsman complied. It wasn't defiance, it was presence, the maritime version of holding eye contact. The Venezuelan crew felt the shift in gravity as the hull carved across the submarine's beam, sliding laterally through the Caribbean chop. For the next 90 seconds, neither vessel transmitted a word. Radios stayed silent. Only the hum of the Giciary's engines filled the bridge. Then, without warning, the submarine adjusted again, a fractional turn back to bearing 084, then stillness. The Venezuelans had seen this behavior before in NATO exercises. Posture locks, deliberate micro-movements designed to test reactions. The captain didn't take the bait. At 0659, the sub's sail vented a slow plume of exhaust. To an untrained eye, it looked like nothing. To anyone who's ever studied submarines, it was the prelude to descent. Depth changed, the sonar tech murmured, eyes on the screen. She's going under. Within seconds, the first shift registered. Bubbles spread outward, and the massive hull began its slow slide beneath the surface. No radio signal, no farewell ping, no diplomatic formality, just physics reclaiming steel. The water folded over itself, collapsing into white foam and then glassy calm. By the time the Venezuelan radar completed its next sweep, the sub was gone. 0700 hours. The sonar returned to flatline blue. The contact trace faded completely after 3 sweeps, 6 heartbeats, maybe less. The ocean had swallowed its intruder like it always does, quietly and without ceremony. On the Giciary's bridge, silence stretched long. Every sailor stared at the same empty patch of horizon, unsure whether to feel relieved or insulted. The captain broke it first, mark final coordinates, save all logs. His voice stayed calm, professional, but the crew could hear the weight beneath it. In the Combat Information Center, technicians exported sonar and radar data to encrypted drives. Every frequency, every bearing, every second of acoustic signature would be parsed later by analysts in Caracas. Not for retaliation, for understanding. Because in encounters like this, ignorance is more dangerous than hostility. Meanwhile, 200 feet below the American submarine continued its quiet retreat. Her hydrophones confirmed the Venezuelan vessel hadn't pursued. Mission log entry. Presence operation successful. No incident. Local response time. 15 minutes. Data transmission secure uplink to Southern Command complete. For the Americans, the encounter was already old news archive before the surface had even flattened. For the Venezuelans, it was different. This wasn't just a contact. It was a reminder that their patrol routes were being mapped in real time, that their defensive perimeter was more concept than barrier. The sub hadn't appeared to intimidate. It had appeared to demonstrate. In the debrief later that morning, the Giciary's officers would summarize it clinically. Unidentified U.S. Navy submarine surfaced 1.8 nanometers off patrol line. No hostile act observed. Intent, probable surveillance. The words would be dry, careful, stripped of the quiet awe that had filled the bridge when black steel broke the morning sea. By 0703, the adrenaline began to fade. Coffee cups found their way back to consoles. Engines throttled down. The patrol resumed as if nothing had happened. But every sailor aboard knew better. Encounters like this don't end, they echo. For the U.S. Navy, this was doctrine in action. Freedom of navigation packaged in stealth and timing. For Venezuela, it was proof that their radar picked up only what others wanted them to see. Between them lay an invisible line, not a border, but a boundary of nerve. At 0705, the Giciary's final entry went into the ship's log. Incident concluded. U.S. submarine submerged. Last known position 10 degrees 17 minutes north, 64 degrees 32 minutes west. Sea state calm, morale steady, and that was it. The ocean closed the file. No protests, no headlines, just another silent encounter between two navies fluent in the language of presence. Because at sea, the most powerful message is the one that doesn't need to be spoken.